Welcome to the UK Virtual School coaching session on innovation. So what is innovation? Well, innovation is the introduction of new things, ideas, or ways of doing something. So new things, this could be a new invention. New ideas, these could be new ways of seeing or analysing the world around us. And new ways of doing something, well, it could be something that we've done previously, but we do it in a new way. Innovation tends to be linked with progress, and so when we describe something as being innovative, it tends to be better than what was done before. I'd like to introduce you to one of my favourite innovations, and that's my telescope. This is one of my favourite innovations. This is my telescope. This type of telescope is called a 10-inch reflecting telescope, and the reason it's called a reflecting telescope is because it has a big mirror inside it. In fact, it has two mirrors inside it. The first mirror is the mirror that you're seeing my reflection in. Hello there. And the second mirror is here. This is the secondary mirror. Now the first mirror, the primary mirror, this is slightly curved, so instead of the light coming straight back out, what happens is that the light that hits that mirror is reflected to a point, and then it's reflected a second time through this secondary mirror, and the light then passes out through this tube here. And I put my eye on the end here, and what happens is that I can change this. This is my zoom lens. I can magnify the image so I can see more details. And what this telescope is basically doing is it's taking lots of light that is incident on this big mirror here, and it's focusing it into a small area so that it can all go into my eye. Now this allows me to then see objects which are very faint. And I can see some impressive things with this telescope. I can see the moons around Jupiter. I can see the rings around Saturn. I can see regions in our galaxy where stars are being born and where stars have died. I can even look at really distant objects like other galaxies, which are huge distances away. Now there are many innovations that have gone into developing these telescopes, and I'm going to talk to you about a handful of those innovations today. The first innovation I'd like to bring to your attention was an early attempt to understand light. And a person I'd like to bring your attention to is called Ptolemy. Ptolemy was from ancient Greece around about 2,000 years ago. He was a philosopher and a mathematician. He was an astronomer as well as many other things. And he wrote a book, and the book was called Optics. And in this book he wrote about reflection and refraction. Now, where is the innovation? What was so innovative about what Ptolemy did? Well, Ptolemy used the scientific method. He performed experiments and applied mathematics to try to explain the different ways that light behaves. Through Ptolemy's work, we began to develop an understanding of how the universe and the world around us works. Ptolemy wasn't correcting everything that he stated. However, what he did was he laid the groundwork for the future scientists. Ptolemy was a true innovator. I'd like to introduce you to two other innovations in history. The first innovation was something called a reading stone. And the reading stone is just a transparent material like quartz or glass, and it has a certain shape. And when you place a reading stone over a page with a picture or writing on it, it magnifies it. Now reading stones were developed by someone called Abbas ibn Firnas, and they weren't invented by him. You see, these types of stones have been around for a very long time, and they've always had this property. But what Abbas ibn Firnas recognised was that they could be used in a new way, and this was his innovation. The second innovation was something called a camera obscura. Now, camera obscuras, there are records of camera obscuras being used for thousands of years. However, a very famous scientist, mathematician called Ibn al-Haytham, took the work of Ptolemy and he further developed it. And he used the camera obscura to describe how light travels in straight lines. He did a lot of other things, but this is the thing that is important to us for our telescope. Now, all of these previous inventions and these previous innovations were used and adapted and modified. And eventually, a telescope was invented, and the telescope was invented in Holland. But I don't want to bring to your attention the telescope being invented. What I'd like to bring to your attention was how the telescope was used. You see, a famous scientist from Italy called Galileo Galilei, who lived in the 16th century. He was one of the first people to take a telescope and point it at the sky. And he made some of the most amazing discoveries. Some of the discoveries he made was that he was the first person to see the moons around Jupiter. He was the first person to see the rings around Saturn. And these discoveries revolutionized our understanding of the universe. For the first time ever, we had seen that things could be in orbit around other things. And this provided enough evidence for us to start realizing that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. Galileo was a true innovator, and he got into a lot of trouble for his work. So, on to our next innovator. I'd like to introduce you to Isaac Newton. So remember, Galileo Galilei had already used the telescope to stare into the sky, and he'd made some amazing discoveries that revolutionized our understanding of the universe. Well, then Isaac Newton came along, and Isaac Newton reinvented the telescope. You see, the telescopes we had used previously required lenses, and lenses are difficult to make, especially big lenses. Well, Isaac Newton, who was an astonishing scientist, he recognized that what we could use instead of lenses was mirrors. And so Isaac Newton redesigned the telescope using mirrors instead of lenses. Well, this revolutionized our ability to make telescopes. Mirrors are much easier to make than big lenses. And so now we were able to make these telescopes ever bigger. And the bigger the mirror on a telescope, the more light it collects, and so the fainter the objects that we can see, and the clearer we get to see those objects. Now, Isaac Newton's innovation was in his invention. He redesigned the telescope, and he made it more accessible. Isaac Newton reinvented the telescope using mirrors rather than lenses, and this allowed us to build ever bigger telescopes. Isaac Newton's innovation was in invention. Since Newton's time, telescopes have been innovated and innovated and innovated upon. Today we have a huge range of different types of telescopes. We don't just look at telescopes that use visible light, we use telescopes that use radio waves and microwaves, different kinds of light that we cannot see. What you can see here, this is something called the Very Large Array. This is a radio telescope, and all of these dishes, they constitute one giant telescope. We have telescopes that are in orbit around the Earth, outside of the atmosphere. One of these is called the Hubble Space Telescope, that's been in space for 20 years. Another one is called the James Webb Space Telescope, that just got launched in December. These telescopes represent a huge amount of innovation. Our understanding of the universe has progressed phenomenally because of these innovations. Okay, the last one I'd like to talk to you about is education. And as it happens, what I happen to think is an innovation that we are in the midst of at the moment is online education. Distance learning is not a new thing. Distance learning has been done, I know, since I was a child. I remember they were distant learn. You could learn through distance learning, but it all had to be done through the post. There was no such thing as the internet at the time. And in recent years, because of things like the pandemic, and also just because of the movement in technologies, improvements in technologies, online education seems to really be taking off. Now, as a learner, and I am a learner, it's amazing. I can go online and I can find courses from the top universities in any subject I want. And these universities, they provide much of the content they provide for free, so that I can explore and delve as deeply as I want to into any subject. This is phenomenal. This means that anyone who has access to the internet and a device to access the internet, and as we already spoke, most people do have a device to access the internet, can now access the very best education. As a teacher, I'm very happy that I get to be part of the development of this innovation. I get to play my role in further developing and perfecting online education. And obviously the place that I'm doing this is UK Virtual School. So now I'd like you to think about innovation for yourselves. I have 4 tasks for you. The first task: think of an example of something that you use on a regular basis. It can be anything. The second, I want you to take this thing and I want you to think about what is so special about it. What makes it so useful? What makes it different to any other tool or any other service or any other thing that you use to solve that same problem. The third task is I'd like you to think about and do some research into how it was developed. Who first designed it? Is it something that was invented in one sitting? Or is it something that was developed over time by innovator after innovator? Finally, I'd like you to think of a way in which your life could be improved. Can you come up with some ideas on how to make those improvements? What innovations can you come up with for yourself? Thank you very much for listening to this UK Virtual School coaching session on innovation.